Hello there. My name is Dr. Chris Atchison-Clare, and I'm the director of CILMAR, the Center for Intercultural Learning, Mentorship, Assessment, and Research at Purdue University. And today I'm going to demo for you and sort of walk you through from a teacher's perspective how you might do this activity, Understanding Miscommunication, which is one of the activities in the Hubicle. So this is not a video for students, but a video for instructors to give you some guidance, kind of like a teacher's instructional manual. With some thoughts about how I've used this activity and maybe some things you might want to think about as you go through slides or run the debriefing questions. So this activity in general is great for any context in which misunderstandings are likely to occur. So if you have diverse groups of people, teams working with each other, it's a great sort of pre-experience activity, or maybe during an experience where people are engaging in teamwork to help them work through some of the communication issues that they might be having. It's also great in the language learning context because sometimes people assume that the conflicts or the misunderstandings that come up in a situation where people speak different languages or speak the same language to different levels of fluency are all about language, when in fact they are often a result of the differing cultural context. And it's also great for study abroad preparation to give students a framework to later understand and analyze the experiences that they have misunderstanding people or being misunderstood. So with that being said, let me just click through to the first slide. So in this first slide, it just basically presents a model of communication. It's a pretty simplified model and a very traditional model, one that's been around for many, many decades. But it basically frames any one interaction of communication, one sending of a message or a message plus a feedback loop. And it frames that message as coming from a source to a receiver, with feedback going back from the receiver back to the source. And this all happening via some sort of communication channel and inside a larger cultural context. So you're going to want to show this to students or learners if you're not dealing with students, but learners of some other kind. And when you discuss this with learners, I think some really important things to point out are the fact that the cultural context is not just noise. You see the lightning bolts there and you see noise here, and so maybe the implication there is that culture gets in the way of the messages that are being sent and received, when in fact it's a much more complex picture than that. The cultural context provides in its base and its foundation a way to understand messages. And it becomes noise when the cultural context is very complicated. For example, when the source and the receiver don't share the same cultural background, or when there's some sort of power differential or something happening within the cultural context that then creates that noise interfering with the message being understood. You might also want to point out that not all communication channels are created equal. So you've got text messages, emails, video conferences, face-to-face, lots of different options for how we send and receive messages. And the capacities for each one of those and the tendencies for us to misunderstand each other vary from context to context, or communication channel to communication channel. So you can solicit feedback from people, and you do this in a more discussion-based approach. You don't have to lecture at learners, but it is important that everybody's sort of on the same page about this model before you move into the activity itself. The other 3 slides in this PowerPoint are different scenarios that you can present to learners, sort of like critical incidents. They're written in second person, which I really like because it puts people sort of in, so it's not, Mary and John or whatever, second person names might be, but it maybe makes things feel a little bit more personal because it reads as if this is happening to you. However, the complicating factor here is that you may be asked to place yourself in a position and have feelings attributed to you that that don't feel very natural because each scenario is written from a particular set of cultural values. So it may or may not align with how you might react to the same situation. And that's just, to me, a further point for discussion. It's not something to keep you from using this approach. So in this first scenario, it's written from a more professional context. You know, you're working in a team. It's a business setting. It's certainly applicable to the higher education context or lots of other places, nonprofit worlds. There's lots of different situations in life when we work on teams. So you could definitely tweak this if the business setting doesn't feel like it is resonating with whoever you're working with. So feel free to change the text on the slide and make it more applicable to the context of the learners that you're working with. Some things that I think are important to think about in this particular scenario are that the language in which the scenario is written sometimes can feel loaded, right? So even words like passive approach can have positive or negative connotations for different people. So one of the things I like to do is, as part of the debriefing process, is just ask people to reflect on how they interpreted the language of the scenario and how it made them feel and what assumptions or judgment they were making about that. One other thing to consider with this particular scenario is that some people will see this as a problem and others will not. So that last sentence, you notice that some team members are dominating the conversation while others have not contributed at all. Depending on the cultural background of the learners, some people will see that as an issue that needs to be addressed and a problem to be solved, and other people are just like, okay, that's how the team operated. No big deal. Let's move forward from here. And so even in defining if there's a problem or what the problem is, you might come across differences amongst learners and how they react to this scenario. The second scenario here is more personal, so we wanted to take it out of the professional setting. But again, how I mentioned earlier, people may or may not react as upset or feeling deceived or forgotten if indeed someone agreed to help them and then didn't show up. So we have to be careful about the assumptions that we're making and how this is written from a very particular cultural perspective that not everybody will identify with. The third scenario here is more sort of out in public amongst acquaintances. And again, some people will have those feelings of confusion and hurt and others won't. Some people would have reacted by sharing and others would have hidden or minimized their bad day and replied with something more like, oh, everything's great, or fine, how are you? Very surface level sort of response. So again, something to talk with learners about is how much they identify with this, as well as going through the actual activity in the debriefing process. So these slides are meant to accompany the lesson plan description. So you'll see, in addition to this PowerPoint slides, the handout that gives you as an instructor instructions, and that handout has some very specific debriefing questions, which you're welcome to use, or you can create your own or make them up in the moment, depending on what in response to what learners are saying. And feel free, I would really encourage people to add to this curation for this activity by writing a review. If you've used this activity or something similar, what was your experience with that? What are some risks or potential problems that you want to warn other instructors or trainers or mentors about? In what context did this work really well? And what adaptations might you be making? You're also welcome to send us any ways that you modify this or transform it for different contexts. We're happy to add additional slides, additional scenarios, additional sets of instructions, more debriefing questions, so that this is as fleshed out and as useful as possible.